Okay, in this first tutorial we'll be going over how to set up and install and the basic settings and overview of how the Landscape Generator 3 works. So to install Landscape Generator, obviously you will go to Window, General Asset Store to download it. But right now we're not actually going to do that because it's not out yet. So instead we will be importing package I just exported here. So it's just, once you have your package, you can import it. Make sure you're importing everything. I've set up a sample scene here. Just a basic project with standard. Actually, I didn't get rid of the sample scene. Should be using this one. There we go. Just this. This is a standard project. It's not using high definition or uh, lightweight render pipeline, but the landscape generator is compatible with those two render pipelines. So let's get started here. Uh, you'll see that you get the Untitled Tools folder, and then there'll be a landscape generator, and there's a demo folder in the landscape generator folder, a documentation folder, and an assets folder. The demo has a demo scene. You can go here, go to the demo scene, and you can preview what types of terrains you will make. We will be using the demo assets to create our terrains, but we won't be doing any of that in this first tutorial. So yeah, this is kind of the terrains you'll get with your landscape generator. This is a single biome. We will be creating a single biome with the landscape generator in this tutorial, but you can create multiple biomes. Obviously, it's biome based. So there's also documentation you can read. Very useful. Yeah, 8 pages here explain exactly how the landscape generator works in depth. So if you need any help, there's a support site, a bug reporting site, and feedback. There's forums, and you can contact us at untitledtools@gmail.com. You can also follow the development of the landscape generator on Trello. So yeah. Okay. So let's go back to our example scene we have set up here. And the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go up to where it says Untitled Tools. This should have appeared when you download the landscape generator. You're going to go down to Landscape Generator and click Generator. Oops. Okay. The landscape generator should appear over here. It'll appear wherever your inspector tab is. It tries to appear next to that. Obviously I have the lighting tab here. This doesn't really matter. So it'll always appear next to the inspector tab if the inspector tab is down here. Obviously, you can close that. Oops. Don't worry about that. It's because it was didn't have a path in the autosave. But for instance, I click that, now the landscape generator appears down here. Obviously, it looks really weird because it's all stretched out. Let's just reset. Yeah, should really fix that. Let's just reset scene here, window, layouts, default. There we go. Okay. So yeah, once we press our landscape generator button here, it brings up the landscape generator next to inspector window, and you'll notice that there's a bunch of settings, and we're going to start with the home tab, and I'll briefly explain the other 4 tabs. There is another tab that appears after you start adding biomes, but that does not matter right now. We'll get to that in a bit. So when you load the landscape generator, it'll have the general settings open. The home window, Home tab contains all the settings that you will use in your landscape generator. The Biomes tab contains the biomes that you will create, and the File tab is for saving and loading landscape generator profiles. Um, so let's start with the Home tab, just for this tutorial, and go over all the settings of the landscape generator. And if you've ever used the Unity terrain system, which you probably have if you're using this landscape generator, you'll probably know what a lot of these settings do. So when you first open it, it has the general settings open. The general settings just have a seed value, and you'll randomize the seed too. So if you check this checkbox, it will, whenever you generate a new terrain, it will randomize the seed. So you get diverse terrains. It's entirely seed based, so if you don't turn this on and you don't just randomize it by clicking the random button, um, you can, for instance, put in something like 5, 6, 7, and if you keep that there without it random, it will always generate maps that look the same if you do not change any of the other settings. It will always generate the same terrain with the same settings. That's for consistency purposes. So that's all the general settings have currently. They will probably be expanded on, or they might just be moved to a different setting area like the generation, and they will be removed entirely. Viewing settings, you can just click on this. This section is still very much in development, but it is what the landscape generator scene GUI system uses. For instance, if you want to see where your landscape will be placed, you can click Show General, and it's just being put in the world center right now. But if I go to the generation settings and move the world center a bit, you can obviously see that it changes. And these won't show up in the scene, which is great. Let's just put that back at the center here. And go back to our viewing settings. There's also showing the ground planes. This will show the literal and the map size of the terrain. So if you set the generation settings to 1, I think it's, well, 1-to-1 ratio, I guess. So if I set this to 512 by 512, since it's the same size, this brown, I guess, ground plane here would be the actual size of the generated terrain and where it will be. Obviously, if I move this around, it changes the position. And the green plane is the size of the map. You usually want the size of the map to be, or the size of the literal terrain to be greater than the map size, so basically not be able to see the green, because then you get more terrain space, but that also decreases the resolution of the height map, so it's a trade-off. Let's move on to the third setting here, the biome boundaries. This won't actually show anything because we don't have any biomes set here, but for instance, if we have a biome and we do use biome boundaries, you can see that it will show the biome boundaries in whatever color you specify, and it will update as you move it around. So this is great if you want biomes to only appear in specific world space spots. Like for instance, if we go and turn on the ground planes, again, we can specify exactly where we want our biome to be. Well, that's a little big. And this is three-dimensional, so we can cut it off on tops of mountains, or we can raise it up so it's not on the ground. So that's exactly, in that box right there is where our biome would appear. Only there, nowhere else. So let's just get rid of this biome entirely. And you go back to here. So that's the viewing settings. They will be expanded on. There will be previews that you can access within the viewing settings. in the future, but not currently in the first version, or the third version, the first version of the third version. So 3.00. The terrain settings, uh, these are basically just the actual settings of the terrain. So if I just quickly generate a biome here, it might throw errors because I don't actually have any objects, but no, it didn't. Well, look at that. It's really tall though. Yeah, I knew that'd happen. But for instance, um, we can make it so it's static, not static. That's the only real setting that's not in the settings of the actual terrain. So if you click on your terrain and you go to the terrain settings, uh, basically all the settings are here that you'd see. None of these settings are there because they're controlled by the generation settings. I know I'm bouncing around tabs a bit, but I'm trying to keep these tutorials fairly short so you can get through them pretty quickly. So the terrain width and terrain height are actually controlled by the literal terrain size here. So the terrain settings. But the rest of the settings here are controlled by the terrain settings itself. There's also an auto apply settings. For instance, if I go to the generation settings and I change the literal terrain size, it's not going to do anything. But if I turn on the auto apply settings, and the auto apply settings apply to the generation and terrain settings, and I turn the size down, it will update the size in real time. I don't recommend doing this if you have a fully generated terrain. It's fine with terrains like this, but if you have detail objects and tons of objects everywhere in your terrain, it gets very laggy turning on the auto apply settings, so I would not recommend doing that. I think we're going to keep our terrain around 150. And if you just want to apply the settings without generating the whole terrain and clicking apply in the generation tab, which is going to be later, but the apply button in the generation tab will also apply these settings. If you don't want to apply everything, biomes and objects at once, you can just click this button here, and that will not use it does what the checkbox does, just once though, so it doesn't lag as much. Okay, let's move on to generation settings. I'm going to turn the lighting off here because it's taking up some CPU power. Oh, there we go. So let's see. Oh wait, no, I can just turn off static on the train, can I? What am I doing? So turn that off, click apply, and now it's all lit. Okay. You'll notice also that when you generate a terrain, it creates a new terrain asset. That's a new feature with the terrain system. It links terrain assets with the actual terrain itself, as you can see. Let's move on to the generation settings now. Generation settings contain everything like map size, the actual size of the terrain, and other random settings that didn't make sense to be in the terrain settings. So let's start with the map size. That's fairly self-explanatory. That's the height map resolution, the detail map resolution, the base map resolution. Basically every map uses this map size variable here. It goes up to 81,000, but I don't recommend that for just testing out your terrain. It might be good to set a seed, and then when you like a terrain, set it up to 8100, 81,000. And then generate your terrain because it takes quite a while to generate terrains that big. There's the detail resolution per patch. This is for detail objects. If you've used the Unity train system and you actually know what this means, it's a little bit confusing of a setting. This is basically the resolution of each patch of detail objects. When detail objects are set down on the train, they're put down in patches. So that's just how detailed each patch is, basically. You can usually just leave this on 8. It'll work fine. But if you know what you're doing, you can go from 8 to 128. Smoothing iterations. If your terrain seems slightly jagged, has jagged edges like this, you can bump up the smoothing iterations. That'll smooth out your terrain. The world center, this is where your terrain will actually be. So if we turn on auto apply and we move the world center up, down, it's obviously just where your terrain is going to be located in the world. And the center, if we show the general here, would be at the middle of the terrain. So right there. Okay, let's turn off auto apply so it doesn't lag. The literal terrain size is the actual size. Actually, I'm going to just turn that on for the rest of the settings here so it won't be lagging. Is the actual size of the terrain or scale in meters. You can really just see what this does here. I'm changing it. So let's change that back to 500. I'm actually going to change it up to 750 by 750 for the terrain I'm going to be creating, and probably I'm going to turn this up to like 200. That looks nice. Okay, let's go to the relative water height. This is for, if we add a biome here in our biomes tab, this is for biomes that are beach biomes or ocean biomes. They will use the relative water height. So for instance, this would be the water would occur below 25% of the terrain. So probably around here, around this little section of terrain here, there would be water there, and then a little pond there, and then go up. But if we set it up to 50%, it would go up to 50% of the actual height of the terrain. So that's what that does. This might be removed in the future, because you can just use biome height curves or biome height mass to do this. Or if you want to not have a specific texture anywhere, you can, for instance, go to your textures and control the height value of it with a min-max or slope min-max. Okay, so back down to biome application flags here. When you go and generate your biomes, you can choose if you want to apply. When you click the apply button in the generation settings, you can choose if you want to apply only objects, only textures, or both of them. That's all that does. Okay, let's move on to the height map base settings. This is fairly important for keeping your terrain not insane looking, I guess, is how I'm going to call it. This will overlay another layer of noise onto your terrain and average all the biomes noise maps together with this noise, so it's not so flat and then mountainous and then flat again. Is how I'm going to call it. So this is pretty useful. You can turn this off if you don't want to use this, but I prefer to have it on myself. And then there's the population map density settings. It's a pretty long name, but pretty simple use. When you actually generate your biomes here, I already have it generated. If I show the map, this purlin noise in the background here, that is just controlled by the population map density settings. And in each of these height map settings, you'll find these in the biomes too, right here. They just have a setting for lacunarity, persistence, the number of octaves, the scale factor. So this would be uh, the um, the actual scale factor that it uses. This is relative. Um, would be the map size divided by the scale factor. So about 100 in this case. And the height map curves, you can add curves, and then it'll pop up this curve mode here. If you want your terrain to, you know, shoot up a bit, you can use a curve like that, or level out at the top, you can use a curve like that. If you have multiple curves, you obviously want to combine them in some way. So what you can do is you can select how you want to combine them here. Recursive will take the output of the map. For instance, you get a pixel value or a height value of 0.3. You'll find 0.3 here. You'll look up and it'll say, oh, that's about 0.4 here. So then it'll take 0.4. It'll go to here. It'll go 0.4, and it'll go up and it'll say, oh, this is about 0.3, and it'll take 0.3 again, and it'll go over to this one, and this one will obviously just return 0.3 for 0.3 because it's a linear line. And then so the returning value will be 0.3 because obviously these curves cancel each other out, and then this one just returns it. But if I have a curve like this and I get 0.3 at the end here, it'll go over to 0.3. It'll go up and say, oh, this is now, it is 0.7. Or 0.3 would be, yeah. So that's how recursive works. Inverse recursive is literally just the opposite of that. So it would take the 0.3 original value here, go up, and this would be about 0.3 again. There's a lot of 0.3s here. It's a bad example, but it would get 0.3 right here. Then it would go to 0.3 and get like 0.1. Then it would go 0.1 up here and get about a 0.2 or 0.3 again. So that's how that would work. And average would just take, it would take the 0.3 here, it would take 0.4, 0.1, and 0.3 here, and average all of those together to get about 0.3 again. Okay, so that's what the height map curves do. There's height map mass. You can add these. For instance, if I just use this default particle mask here, it will average this mask with the terrain height. Oh, did I do this in the wrong spot? Oh, I didn't make the texture readable. Yeah, it has to make sure your masks are readable when you're actually using masks. If you have this problem with the generation thing here, you can just click the generate button again, and it will generate your maps again. Okay. Yeah, so make sure you make your maps readable. You would do that just by going here. I'm going to give an example of this. So if I go to, actually I'm just going to use my demo textures here. So if I go to my inspector and I click on a texture, you would just click read write enabled. I have it enabled here already, so that one is already readable. I should have used that instead. These are grayscale masks, by the way. So all those settings are practically the same for everything. Okay, that basically covers The home window, I'm just going to generally explain how the biomes window works here and the rest of these windows, and then we'll wrap up this tutorial. So in the biomes window, you'll start out with no biomes. The Landscape Generator 3 is a biome-based system, so you'll need at least one biome to work. If you don't want to have multiple biomes, you can just have one biome. But if you do, you can have really as many biomes as you want. Each biome is assigned a biome color by random. These biome colors should be fairly different from each other because you don't want them mixing up in the actual map, because when you go to generation, you'll see once it finishes generating the maps that it actually puts the biomes down here in sort of a Voronoi style noise map system, if you know what that means. And it lays down the heights as so. If you want to remove a biome that you don't want, you can just click to remove, and you can either click yes or remove and yes and don't ask me again. That means you can just remove the rest of them until you reload the landscape generator. When you want to name your biome, you can just type in a name. I'm going to call this example biome, and it'll update the name. The next tutorial will go over exactly how biomes work, biome textures and biome objects, as well as biome height mapping, biome boundaries, and the rest of the biome settings. Once you add a biome, another tab opens up. It's the generation tab. This tab is pretty simple. It contains all the settings for, or all the buttons really, for generating maps, and if you've just closed that, the 3 generation buttons for generating your landscape. This is fairly simple. I don't really need a tutorial on the buttons, but I'll include it with a generation tab tutorial. And the last tutorial will be on the file system. So saving and loading landscape generator profiles that are new with the Landscape Generator 3, auto-saving, and overwriting. So that's basically it for this tutorial. Watch the next 3 tutorials to learn the rest of the Landscape Generator, and I'll see you in the next ones.